going to look at writing academically, just in the sense that we have a conversational tone and we have an academic, and also in the notes in the class, a reflective tone when writing. So here's the beginning of our discussion question. It says, what are some of the dangers using a conversational tone in academic papers? And it wants us to find 3 reasons for why we might not want to have a conversational tone, why it's not appropriate for that particular space. We're going to learn some more about those 2 tones in just a minute. So after we look at why we want to avoid conversational tone, we want to practice rewriting some conversational sentences into an academic tone. And remember, there's a disclaimer here that's bigger than the question, because we're just contemplating an idea. We're looking at it. We're exploring it. There are entire classes, an English course, for instance, where we would work on this in more depth. But right now, we're just considering the concept. So here are 2 ideas. First, we say, that was a great movie. It hit all the right notes for me. And then we have, the movie was heartwarming and kind. It showed the value of love and communication and relationships. Why are they different? What makes them so very different from one another? How do they fit into this idea of conversational versus academic? Well, notice a few things right away. One, there's a lot more description here. We're not using big, vague words like great. This is something I like to cover when I talk about editing our own work or having others edit our work. If we hand our paper to someone, we typically say, if we're handing them something of ours to review, even if it's just a dish we've cooked, we say, isn't it good? Or is it good? We've already set the parameter that we're not looking for feedback. We're looking for, is it good or not? And then that good is dependent on relationships. So most of us are going to feel compelled to say, oh, that's good. But if we want to do justice to the idea, we need to say something like, hey, here's my paper. What do you think the main point is? Hey, here's my paper. What do you like the most about the examples? Which example stands out to you? Hey, here's my paper. What do you think about the conclusion? Does it give you a feeling that you should act upon? And then we look for what they might say it does. We don't want to give easy yes, no options there. We want open-ended responses. So we're steering away from things like great, that are open to lots of interpretation, that don't give a lot of detail. And we are steering into being really focused and clear cut. We want to be specific. We want people to know what we're talking about. It's not that these are in totally different conversations either. Depending on who we're chatting with and how much time we have, we might say this for an opener, and then we might go into more detail if we have the opportunity to talk with a friend. But we're looking for those sentences and we're saying, hey, what makes this one different from that one? Neither is perfect, neither is sort of done necessarily, but they're doing different things, and that's what we want to be aware of. We're not looking at them to say, I know exactly how to fix it or exactly what should be different, but we're saying there's something different in those spaces. What is it and why? So some of these bullet points specifically, are taken from the content. So session 4 has a lot to read and watch. But when we're looking at conversational tone, we're talking about informal and relaxed spaces. They use things like tells a story, simple words. We might say something like, you like this, I like that. So we're using that second person voice there. They're often about showing our personality, but all of these rules, as you'll find out, the more you study English and the more you explore that writing space, they're all meant to be broken in small ways. So we're learning what makes them different from one another so that we can really play with that later. The academic tone is going to be more formal. And here we say stuff like, don't use emotions. I often suggest to students, hey, if you want to put something emotional in there, if you want to say, this happened to me, that's why I'm writing this paper, that's why I want you to know how important this particular topic is. I often say, hey, wait till the penultimate paragraph. Wait till you're just before the conclusion and you've presented evidence, you've presented examples, you've presented all of this information, and now you're saying, hey, it's real, because it happened to me or it happened in this way. And so I know that experience. So I often say, okay, you can have some emotion in there, but you need to be wise with it, because emotion doesn't hold forever. We can't calculate how quickly it will burn or how quickly it will sort of fizz out. And then it's simple things like don't use contractions. We try to write everything out. I often do a run through of looking for apostrophes in my work so that I can take out contractions, because obviously I'm using them when I am, sending an email or I'm posting to discussion boards. I want them to be more relaxed. So I may use a contraction there, but I'm not using contractions in my professional work, and I go and I check on that. And then we say things like third person, which again, ideally a lot of work academically is in the third person, but there are going to be times when we do bring in a first person, like in that emotional plea toward the end, or for specific reasons. And the other big part is that there is structure to it. If you think about most things, there is some sort of structure. Like when you call someone, you say hello, you talk to them, you say goodbye. We don't typically just sort of pick up the phone and start talking and then hang up. Like there is this process to it. And as you look around, you'll start to see that there are lots and lots of things where there are steps, but we don't think about those steps in minute detail very often. And that's all the APA and MLA and Turabian and Chicago Manual of Style and all of these different things are doing. They're just saying, hey, we've agreed to look at language in a certain way. We've agreed to look at topics in a certain way. And so we're going to have some structure. So typically you'll see APA here, and then in some classes, Turabian. MLA isn't something we do at CCU, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you're ever looking at those kinds of things, or you're at a company and you're like, they seem to have an approach. Specific companies and how they approach these different styles, they typically have what we call white papers. And those are the way that company has decided to run these formatting approaches. So you won't see Google using APA, but you will see them having a formatting style. And that's part of their white papers. So if you're at a big company, or even some of the small ones, look for how people are doing things. Are there specific ways that they like to send an email or a memo? Different ways that they structure their email signatures. Like look for those things, because they're all part of sort of company formatting or group formatting and branding. And APA is just looking at lists and rules and saying, if I put it this way, everyone knows where to look for things. They know that my title is in a certain place. They know that my references or works cited are in a specific place. And that's all we're doing. We're giving each other clues, a roadmap as we go along. So, altering those sentences, there is no single best way to do that. Writing is about sharing our voice, and if you think about how you move, how your face moves, how your tone of voice changes, all of those things are part of how you communicate, and that's what we are trying to put down on paper. That's how we use punctuation, it's how we make word choices, it's how we organize our sentences. All of these things are personal. So we may get close to what someone has, but that's the beauty of it. That's the exciting part. So I want to bring up an idea, code switching. It's more common in larger groups. So you will hear like AAVE, let's make sure I know the acronym, but not the words as much. So African American Vernacular English. You'll notice in some areas that there are specific groups of people who speak in a certain way to one another. And that's generally what we're looking at for code switching. We're looking at for really big changes. But we all do it to some extent. On a very basic level, humans recognize that situations require different language, that my tone, my word choice, my formatting, these things are going to be altered based on who I'm talking to, how I want to get that idea across. All of these subtle things more often than not, but they're there and you are doing them. So let's go look a little bit. Why might our tone change? Let's look at some ideas. If I'm talking to my closest friend, it's not the same way I'm going to talk to an instructor or a colleague. It's not the same way I'm going to talk to a fast food clerk. I've just met that person. We have a transactional relationship. They are taking the order or giving me the food, and I'm asking for that food. But there is an approach to everyone, right? There's kindness, there's an overall attitude that we have. But I'm not going to use the same language to talk about a situation to my closest friend as I would a child. I may explain something to my best friend or have them explain something to me, but that explanation is going to look different because we're older than it would be if I were trying to explain something to, say, a 4-year-old. So all of these different people in our lives, we already recognize that there are slight variations, at the very least, if not large variations, at how we are talking to them. I'm definitely going to send a different kind of text to my bestie than I am to a colleague. And that's just part of that understanding and approach. Oops, that's an extra slide. That didn't mean to make it in there. But when you're looking at these big questions and you're thinking, oh goodness, I have to rewrite these sentences. I have to pick 3 of them. What does that look like? Like, how is this going? Just recognize, take a moment to consider 2 people. So you could pick from this list, or you could think of 2 people in your own life, and then think about how a particular story or something that you want to share with that person would be different. So, how, for instance, I tell a story about something in my day to my best friend versus my husband. Those might be closer because I do spend more time talking to those people, but there may, again, be variations. And that's what we're looking for. We're saying, how would that be different if I were telling X person versus Y person? And that is the start of this space where we're starting to say, oh, what I want to say to colleagues at work in class is not going to look exactly the same as what I'm going to say for my bestie. So going back to those examples, I'm not going to be vague and unclear. My bestie knows what the right notes are for me, right? She probably picked out the movie knowing I would love it. Like, that's the whole point, that we're going to experience something together that we both enjoy. But what about the person who doesn't know me? The person I am just having a general transactional conversation with, or that I'm trying to share information with, a client. I want them to know about an experience. I've got to give more detail because they don't know me and they don't know what I mean by things like great. So we want to be specific and clear, and that's the idea that we're trying to explore here. It's not something we do constantly. I think that discussion boards are a great space for a little bit more conversational tone, but we still want that space of saying, hey, I'm at school, and that requires a slightly different tone. The same way work requires a different tone than home. The way different relationships require different voices for each one of us. So just try it out. Look for that idea of how you may change words up in different situations and start asking why. And that will be the entire discussion solved, because that's what we're going for.